Welcome to my review of Castlevania. I thought I would do something a bit different and give my experience of exploring this 30-year-old classic of a game that I just never played. That's right, I never played a Castlevania game before. I knew about it in passing, and I just recalled it being some hard NES game. After watching a bunch of retro video game YouTube videos, kept seeing the same thing coming up. Castlevania, Castlevania, Castlevania. So I piqued my interest and I bought the Lord of Shadows on the Xbox 360. That game was a fine experience, but I knew it wasn't the true Castlevania experience that people were talking about. So I decided to plop down and play the original. Since I didn't have the cartridge, I had to play on the NES Classic. That's where this footage is being taken from. It pretty much was what I thought it was. It's a tough NES game. Actually, it's a bit deceptive. I didn't have too many problems with the first two levels, but come the third, it was a whole new ball game. The music ramps up, and you're in for a tough time. It's not so much getting through the level that's hard, but it's getting through the level with as much health as possible so you stand a chance against the boss. One of the biggest problems is something that is well documented, that when you get hit, you get launched backwards. I probably died twice as much from falling after getting hit than from losing all my life. The game itself is linear with little to no exploration. Well, outside of hitting random walls to see if there's a pork chop inside it. The game is a pattern recognition game, but it also has a layer of randomness to it, which ultimately adds to the difficulty. For example, you can run a level 3 times, and each time the enemy will attack you from below and you have to jump over it or something. And once you get that pattern down, then the 4th time you run it, it attacks from above and throws your whole run off. There is some silliness to the pattern recognition though. One area was just kicking my butt, and I was taking so much damage getting through it. But then I realized you could just walk through the whole area and nothing will hit you. The controls for an NES game, this would probably be considered smooth, but nowadays it's fairly stiff. There is no movement once you jump, so make sure you're fully committed when you jump because there's no fine-tuning it when you're in the air. The weapons you get are pretty cool, and one basically breaks the game, well, at least in the boss fights. Your main weapon, the whip, can be upgraded 2 times. Once for more damage and again for longer range. You do lose this if you die, but the game is forgiving in that if you don't have one of the upgrades, it will give you one fairly quickly. So for a quick overview of the sub-weapons, the dagger I found was pretty useless. Although one time I almost took down Frankenstein's monster with it. The axe, which does a good chunk of damage, but outside of the first boss I never used it. As a matter of fact, I really didn't see it that often. The cross, which is a good go-to weapon if you don't have any of the overpowered ones we're going to talk about in a minute. The stopwatch is nice, it stops time. This one comes in handy, but it's most useful once you get to the clock tower, which is just full of nonsense with the number of enemies coming at you. Lastly, the holy water. Oh, you blessed liquid. For most of the boss fights, this is really overpowered. It will stun lock any enemy, but it will also damage them, and you can kill most of the bosses without them even getting an attack off. Unfortunately, the final boss, Dracula, in his first form, that strategy doesn't work. Now let's talk about the final boss. It's a pain to fight him. Here's my first attempt. Not great. For a while you wonder if you can even hit this guy, and it was like that for half an hour. But as I continued to die over and over and over and over, things started to click, and I started figuring out how to move from him, how to get 2 cheap shots in at the very beginning, how to jump over his projectiles. Finally I beat him. And his next form stomps me to death. But this second form can get stun locked by the holy water, so use it as much as you can, and eventually I mean eventually, you will be able to take him down. With that, I get to put a feather in my cap and join the club of those who have beaten Castlevania, a 30-year-old classic that is still fun today.